Okay na ito.
Ito. I-focus mo ako.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Gospel reading. The true glory of Jesus. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him. They went up on a high mountain where they could be alone. There in front of the disciples, Jesus was completely changed, and his clothes became much whiter than any bleach on earth could make them. Then Moses and Elijah were there talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Teacher, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But Peter and the others were terribly frightened, and he did not know what he was talking about. The shadow of a cloud passed over and covered them. From the cloud a voice said, "This is my son, I love him. Listen to what he says." At once the disciple looked around, but they saw only Jesus. As Jesus and his disciples were coming down the mountain, he told them not to say a word about what they had seen until the Son of Man had been raised from death. Amen.
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 It says in your bulletin that we're in the 6th Sunday after Epiphany, but also it is Transfiguration Sunday. And the story of the Transfiguration is told in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, not John, just those 3. And you get the impression that his disciples were not quite sure what was going on. Now you would think they had been hanging around with him, he'd been their teacher, and they would have known that he was more than just a regular guy. Okay, he was something really, really, really special. And especially with the Transfiguration, he became like dazzling white, like light came upon him. Now, we've experienced it here in this church, but you didn't know that. Sometimes light comes through that window, and if you're up there on the pulpit, and it's the right time of day, and the light comes on, anybody, I don't care who you are, you're just glowing, all right? And it's sort of that kind of a thing. It was like just glowing, like, whoa! And it's like, oh my gosh, what should we do? And here's poor Peter. Rather than just enjoying the whole scenery there, it's like, oh, what should I do? Should I build a shelter for the 3 of you guys? You know, just enjoy it. Because that Transfiguration gave them a clue as to who he was about. He was somebody very, very special. In the Gospel of Mark, you often see that the disciples don't quite understand, first of all, who Jesus was and what he was talking about. If I gave it a subtitle, I would say the Gospel of Mark, and then I put underneath there, Jesus and his clueless disciples. They just don't quite get it, okay? And we're all that way at times, aren't we? Right?
Yeah.
Just don't quite get it. And I wanted to share 3 stories with you about people who don't quite get it until finally, oh, okay. The first story, true story. I will give them different names, but it started with a cheerleader from USC. Now you know USC would not have any ugly cheerleaders by most people's standards, right?
Nope.
They're like hot, right?
Yep.
These are hot women. Okay, Sarah was a cheerleader. In fact, she was the captain of the cheerleaders. And she was so drop-dead gorgeous that she could have any guy she wanted. And a lot of the football players, of course, went after her. And then she would maybe go out with these guys, and then they'd see another pretty face and body, and off they'd go to somebody else. She was attracting people very, very superficially. But Sarah also was very, very bright, and she recognized this. So she made a decision that she was not going to have anything to do with these so-called popular guys, and she'd just worry about her studies, get through school, and do the very best she could. And in one of her classes was a guy by the name of Bob, and he was blind, totally blind. He didn't even have light perception, and he would bring his dog with him. And the dog right away would veer him to the seat right next to Sarah. Now there was a reason for that. She smelled good, okay? And the dog thought, remember they have very keen olfactory nerves, right? She smells good. So there would Bob go. And he didn't know what she looked like, right? Because he was totally blind, okay? The dog did though. Anyway, they got to be really, really good friends. And he actually asked her out. And she said, sure, you know, this will be fine. And they started dating and everything. And she recognized something about sometimes when you're blind, you can see through the soul and heart of a person that those who have the greatest vision in the world can't see. Because you can't look at them superficially. You have to search their heart for their character. And see, Sarah finally realized that this was the guy for her. Because she saw her for who she really was. Not what the others thought of her as the hot cheerleader, right? Okay. The other story I wanted to tell you, again, it's about a person who most people didn't recognize him for who he was. When my boys were young, they were very involved in AYSO soccer. Some of you've heard of that, right? Anyway, a fellow came into town, like out of the clear blue, and he just kind of like came in there like gangbusters, and he became the head of the AYSO soccer in Region 6, it was called. And another friend of mine, who was a mother, who had a son playing soccer, she and I recognized a sociopath when we met one. He was fairly good looking and had a smooth tongue. This guy was just absolutely charming. Have you ever met anyone like that? Absolutely charming. Watch out for charming people. Really, I'm serious. Watch out for them. Anyway, he charmed his way through everywhere in the soccer organization. One of the people that he charmed was the treasurer. Do I have to say much more? Nope. He charmed the treasurer, who of course was married to somebody else, and he was married to somebody else. And he charmed the treasurer. And some funny things were going on. He would be bragging about, oh, he could get this place, and they were now going to let them have a field there, and he could go get another place, and they would take care of that, and the kids could play there. This friend of mine, who was a parole officer, she knew charming people, okay? She and I both got together and we said, I think there's something rotten in Denmark, okay? Imagine Shakespeare. Anyway, we started investigating him. We started calling the places that he said that would be available to us in the fall of the next season. We found out that they had turned him down, that nothing was the truth at all. Everything he had said to us turned out to be a falsehood. We had a big meeting, and we challenged him. And you know that most of the people still didn't believe us? We actually had to finally get signed affidavits from these people to show that we were not making up a story, that we were not the people that were lying. It was this guy. We also found out that he was in business, many different kinds of businesses, and he had declared bankruptcy twice. You know, it takes 7 years to do it again. He had declared bankruptcy twice, and the last time was in the state of Iowa. And after the 7 years were up, then he came to California. And it turned out that after our investigation and after we got rid of him, he did it again in California. That was his modus operandi, okay? That's the way he was. So I wanted to talk about not knowing people for who they are. It can be positive or it can be negative, right? But you have to be aware by really searching your soul who people are truly about. The last person I'd like to talk to you about is a person who didn't get into business until after he retired. Now, most of his working years were a failure. He would get into arguments, sometimes a fist fight. For many years, he worked for the railroad, doing all kinds of things. He worked for the people who would put the coal in, because this was a long time ago, okay? He had been responsible for emptying ash cans. He had also, at one point in his life, run a gas station. He had sold insurance but got in trouble because he duked it out with one of the other insurance people, and so he lost that job. Let's just say he did not have the most successful business life. His passion was he loved to cook. And even during the Depression, he would sell some things out of his gas station, and people really liked it. You know, one of the things he liked to do is have food that's flavorful. So he'd be, mixing all these different herbs and spices and things to see what he could come up with. So when he finally retired at age 65, he said, now I want to do my passion. I want to cook. And so he went to many different banks. And you can imagine, he said, where is your history? Where is your business experience? He had none. None whatsoever. And so finally he found somebody who was willing to take a chance on him and give him the money he needed for a startup. That was the beginning of his great career that took place after he retired. You know this fellow. There's not one person here that has never heard of him. Colonel Sanders, that's right. Colonel Sanders. We don't have a prize here, do we? He's right, Colonel Sanders. He was basically, by most people's standards, a failure. Couldn't hold a job, was always getting into it with people, had a real short fuse. But somebody saw potential that nobody else saw in this man. And what he did is that he franchised all these different places rather than trying to own them all. And this is how he really made his money, was by franchising. And of course his secret herbs and spices in the Colonel Sanders chicken. What I wanted to share with you is really no different than the story of Jesus and his disciples going up that mountain. And they saw him all dazzling and thought, what's this all about? And of course Peter had to open his mouth and said, shall I make you a shelter? We often don't see people for who they really are. It can be both positive or negative. We get caught up in our own perceptions. And our own perceptions are really the problem. Because with our perceptions often go a personal bias. And we don't know that person. Most people would have nothing to do with Colonel Sanders. Where was his business experience? What was his financial background? How could he ever open up something and run a business when he's never really had business experience? In the case of the sociopath, everybody thought he really knew what he was doing because, why? He was a businessman. They didn't know his background. They didn't know about his bankruptcies. They didn't know about him having an affair with the treasurer, so he can, and he did. He got a lot of money out of that treasurer because it was a large region. It was a large, what we call a region of AYSO, American Youth Soccer Organization. Oh, he was successful in that. And most people believed him because he had a good line. And most people fell for it. And in the case of Sarah, the cheerleader, most people just saw her on the outside. Beautiful, talented, hot is the way the guys would call her, but with a soul and great character. And somebody who was blind in the eyes but had the vision of the most mighty, mighty person who probably would have 20/20 and then some. Saw into her soul and saw what kind of a person she really was. This is our Transfiguration Sunday. And I ask the question, do you know me? Do you know her? Do you know him? We need to really look at each other and look for character that we all have. Amen.
Amen.